Hello and welcome to the True Worth podcast. Today, my guest is Sue Lubell, and Sue is the author of Root Cause Analysis Made Simple: Driving Bottom Line Improvements by Preventing One Failure at a Time. I've had a look at this book and it's quite a useful, practical book, so I recommend it to anybody who's working in this area. She specialises in asset management and reliability strategy, cost-effective lean maintenance programs, and operational excellence. With a keen interest in building competency and capability in client staff, Susan brings over 25 years of progressive leadership experience to drive asset management business decisions and to implement improvement opportunities in asset-intensive 24/7, 365 production companies, primarily in the commodity sectors such as oil and gas and mining. Susan has held a number of industry roles as a director, and she's a past president of PMAC, the Asset Management Association of Canada. And she is currently chair of the World Partners in Asset Management, which is also one of the global asset management bodies. So welcome, Sue. It's wonderful to have you here. It's morning here for me, but it's afternoon for you. So Sue is based in Canada, and wonderful to have this opportunity to chat with you today.
Thanks, Monique. I'm honored to be able to join you and your guests.
Yeah, fantastic. So look, we wanted to talk today about international collaboration, which is something that you've had a lot of experience with. And so I'd love to just hear from you a bit of what your experience has been with that and a bit of background from you.
Yeah, I think from an international perspective, within my former employment roles at some of the larger oil and gas and mining companies, we certainly had representatives from several countries all working together collaboratively to develop the corporate strategic policies, the guidance for asset management, and they all needed to incorporate concepts, ideas, and guidance that each country could align to. And then, as you noted, within my current role as the chair of the World Partners in Asset Management, past secretary and Canadian rep to the Global Forum on Maintenance and Asset Management, I've had the opportunity to expand out more into some other international collaborations. So through them, I've been contributing to a number of projects and publications, such as the World Partners in Asset Management Global Certification Scheme, the development and revisions to a number of those GFMAM publications, including the landscape. And these efforts really bring together, let's call it like-minded people that represent the various asset management associations from many industry sectors and countries or regions around the world.
Yeah, fantastic. So you've had a lot of involvement over quite a few years with a range of these quite significant global projects. So that's exciting. It must also be quite a bit of work, though, I'm sure, out of hours and, on top of the other work that you do. So I think that means if you're willing to put in that sort of effort, then you must enjoy it. What is it about these collaborations that you most enjoy?
I think one of the biggest things for me is it's quite energizing to work with others from around the world that have a genuine interest in contributing to the wider asset management community. We all bring our ideas, what we see as important, or pressing concerns within our own regions and countries, and genuinely create a more fulsome outcome than just working in isolation. So I feel that any of the publications, any of the teams that I'm working on, or the development really brings in this global perspective to the deliverables.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess that can be a challenge sometimes when people are coming from a lot of different cultural backgrounds. How have you, approached that in terms of getting that collaboration? When sometimes, apart from obviously there'd be sometimes language barriers, but then there's also cultural differences in terms of the perspectives that people bring. How have you found that in terms of approaching that challenge?
I think one of the things we realize is that no company and no country works in isolation. We do definitely live in this global and interconnected world. I think the recent experience with COVID made everyone realize just how interconnected our supply chains are.
Yeah.
And the reality is that we don't need to reinvent the wheel within our own countries or organizations. So there's a lot to be learned from what's been tried elsewhere, what was successful, and what might be done differently next time to achieve better results. And I think we take those learnings and we adapt them to our own operating context. Clearly, my experience with months of freezing temperatures in Canada's north doesn't ring true for the heat waves of Australia.
No.
But the business decisions that we make for our organizational resiliency, remoteness, all of those
Yes.
sorts of things have the same basis.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's part of it, isn't it? A part of making it a success is to focus on what are the things we have in common, rather than, as you say, of course, there's going to be differences in climate and geography and a whole lot of other factors. But, there's a common thread there that we all share and that we can learn from each other. Yeah, so that's fantastic. So what do you see as the main value in taking that global perspective?
I think part of this is around meeting others who are focused in the same areas of asset management. It's a wide-ranging field. And so most of the people that I've met through these global collaborations have been willing to discuss what they've tried, what they've learned, where they're focused next. And it's really an opportunity to get out of the small bubble that we work in and meet others with similar interests. Canada by itself is a vast country with many, many regional differences. And what we're seeing through, from PMAC, which is the Asset Management Association of Canada, the key motto is connect, learn, and contribute. And these global collaborations through the World Partners in Asset Management, Global Forum on Maintenance and Asset Management, take that really one step further and with that bigger step out.
Mm, mm. Yeah, definitely. So I think there's a lot that we can all gain from that, isn't there? Isn't there? I mean, do you think that sometimes people can be too parochial and perhaps undervalue the relevance of what's happening in other places? And perhaps, as you said, they might be in their own bubble and they kind of either ignore or they don't seek to look at what's going on in other places. Have you found that?
Yeah, I think there can be a tendency for some people to sort of ignore what's happening in other countries or not think that it applies to them. Tend to see this when different countries are at different levels of maturity in their understanding and application of asset management. I've noticed it through my global collaboration efforts, whether as an employee or a senior employee or through some of these other more volunteer commitments. There's always sort of a continuum of understanding, change management, building ideas into the way we do things around here. And when those on the leading edge ignore or undervalue the relevance of what's happening elsewhere, so whether it's within their own countries or within other countries, I do live what you consider to be abroad, we lose that ability to collaborate and share with each other.
Yeah, definitely. And like certainly being here in Australia and, what the world considers down under or we're the antipodes over here, sometimes there can be this impression that everything that's going on in the Northern Hemisphere is more important than us here at the ends of the earth. I guess there's an aspect of needing to say, well, we've all got something to contribute here. Do you see that, or do you feel that sometimes? I mean, I guess from a North American perspective, perhaps Canada can be overwhelmed by the US, or perhaps Europe can take a lead on some things. How do you see that sort of interplay between the different parts of the world?
I think that part of this is, as you said, we've got larger countries and organizations and smaller ones. So some of the Canadian groups that I'm dealing with or my previous employers have been multinationals. And so when we're dealing with that, we see the play between the different regions or the different countries of the world and the sizes of their production sites and how much influence they have over the internal decisions, strategy, and direction for the company as a whole. And so once again, I really think it's important for us to understand and realize not everyone is at the same level of maturity on the continuum. And a lot of it also depends on the life cycle, both of the industry within your country, as well as within the specific organization or company itself. And I think that a big part of this is recognizing wherever you are is where you are. And so where are you now with some organizational honesty? Where do you want to get to? And how do we move the dial to get there? And so it's important to understand that operating context. Even within Canada, what happens in our large urban centers can be quite different from the reality of a small northern remote community.
Yeah,
So we need to
definitely.
think
Yeah,
about that as
yeah.
we're making those decisions, and whatever it is has to apply to all of them.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. And we'd see a similar contrast here between our, heavily populated metropolitan areas, which are not large on a world scale, but then we have some very remote places, particularly where, big mining operations happen in quite remote areas, in the desert or um, very far from the large cities in Australia. And I guess that'd be similar in Canada. You also have a lot of mining. So I guess some of this is industry related as well. I think, from the mining perspective, obviously Australia would be seen as one of the prominent countries, and it's certainly a massive contributor to our economy. So it's an industry that's, quite important from our perspective. But then other countries that would obviously, they'd have a different sort of the weight they give to different industries will depend on, their context. Yeah.
And I think Canada is similar. We have a lot of industry with mining, with oil and gas, with agriculture,
Yeah.
and then we've got manufacturing in part of the country. So it's very geographically diverse and spread out. And one size does not fit all. So whatever we put in place needs to bring that forward. And I think that in the opportunities I've had to represent Canada and PMAC in these international collaborations, I need to remember that I'm representing a number of different people, different regions, and different perspectives. So it's not me as an individual coming forward. I'm bringing the viewpoint from across the country and
Yeah, and
making
it's
sure that it works for everyone.
yeah, definitely. And it's not an homogenous view, is it? As you say,
No.
there's variability within countries, within regions, even within sectors. The difference between like a very large international business, like you've described, or small family operated businesses, which are in the same sector or in the same town, but have very different needs and very different approach. So that's quite challenging in the sense of trying to come up with the models, the standards and so on that can be applicable in as many contexts as possible. Yeah, so that's part of the challenge of all of this. But as you said, I guess that makes it exciting too, because it's an interesting challenge to work on. So
Absolutely.
what have you valued most about your involvement in these international collaborations? What does it bring for you personally?
I think that, as I said, one of the biggest things is it's energizing to work with others from around the world who have a genuine interest in that wider asset management community. And I think some of what I value here is it's an opportunity for me on a personal level to contribute back to the wider asset management community, but also feel that I'm making a difference for others. So when I'm trying to, whether I'm representing PMAC, whether we're taking that information from these collaborations back into the education, into the content that we provide to our members within the Asset Management Association of Canada, or whether it's taking the learnings for my employer and then being able to translate that out into all the various locations, I think a big part of it is the value that comes from seeing those broad perspectives and recognizing what could I replicate that would be successful, what might I be able to apply that might need a little tweaking for my organizational context, and what should I think that's really not going to fit culturally. Great idea, but what are you trying to accomplish, and is there a different way to do that fits culturally?
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes people aren't ready for it yet, are they? And from that maturity perspective, it might be something that works really well in one context, and it might be fine for them down the track, but they're just not quite at the stage where they're ready to make the most of something new.
I think part of being in asset management leadership roles is also thinking ahead a couple of years. So so a lot of this stuff, you don't snap your fingers and have it ready to go within seconds. So part of it is anticipating where do we want to be in 3 years or 5 years, and starting to get the systems, the practices and information lined up and ready to go, because
Yeah,
the
yeah.
change management takes a while, and translating from senior management and integrating and aligning from the C-suite right down to the front line is not an instantaneous
No.
process. So we need to start in baby steps that are manageable.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And, as well in asset management, often we're dealing with assets that sometimes have a life cycle that's longer than a human life, and certainly longer than the time period that any one person might work with it. And so we are always taking that more long-term perspective, which I think is in
Yes,
contrast to some of the other disciplines or areas that you might work in that have got a more immediate and short-term focus.
for
So
sure.
yeah, that in itself can be challenging sometimes, I think. So yeah, that's fantastic. So obviously, Sue, given your wealth of experience and your background, I'm sure that your contribution is highly valued wherever you go. But despite that, are there times when you've been underestimated?
Yeah, I think that's a reality for most of us. As I kind of said earlier, there's a bit of a continuum of strategic thinking, application, and sort of baking it into how we do things around here. And there's always those at the forefront of strategic thinking. And just because their organizations or their employers haven't caught up to their thinking doesn't mean that their ideas aren't worthy or don't
Mm,
bring value to the organization. So I think being undervalued doesn't really stop as our career progresses. I still
yeah,
experience this
yeah.
so many years into my career, but we're left to kind of have that self-confidence to continue moving forward and surround ourselves with others who believe in what we can contribute, whether they're
Mm,
inside your own organization or peers at other organizations. Um, it's quite helpful at earlier stages of your career if you've got one or two people who recognize your contributions and the value you bring, even when you may not see it yourself.
mm,
It could be a supervisor or someone else at your company who helps to open the doors for you or encourages you to try something.
mm,
I know for myself, when the local college was looking for an instructor to
yeah.
teach about maintenance management, my work supervisor at the time gave them my name. And that was
Right.
really the push to start branching outside of my day job when your actual direct supervisor says they're going to call you. Get
Yeah.
ready.
Yeah.
So, that was a nice push
Yeah.
moving forward, and recognize that perhaps some of my skills were applicable elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's good when that happens, isn't it? I had a similar thing with my first board when I was 25, and my boss encouraged me to nominate for it. And I might not have done it, or I might not have thought that it was something that I could do if he hadn't have said to me, "Oh,
Mhm.
you should do that, Monique." So sometimes it does. It's good to have someone who recognises the value you can bring, even as you say. Sometimes you might not have seen it yourself, or you might not have considered that opportunity. And I think as we progress through our career, it's good to be able to do the same for others, isn't it? To
Absolutely.
identify where people have talents that they can bring, and to encourage them to take those opportunities. I think that's a really important leadership role
Yeah.
too, isn't it? So if people are thinking about that and looking to collaborate across international groups, what sort of things do you think they need to consider?
I think a couple of the key things might be both the cultural and the personality differences. I
Right,
think
yeah,
we've all worked with somebody who blurts out ideas and others
yeah,
who listen very patiently before expressing their own ideas. But when you add in the cultural norms for working in a business setting in terms of the pecking order of decision making, so
yeah,
does everyone defer to the highest ranking or eldest in the room, or do you operate in a brainstorm and consensus model? Not to mention all of those challenges for many people working a second language.
yes,
Patience and
yes,
understanding are key factors. Everything takes longer. Decisions take longer. Discussions take longer. Everybody brings their valued perspective to the table.
mm,
And I strongly believe the overall end product, whether it's a publication, a framework scheme, any of the documents, the guidance, or the direction, it's usually better than one that was developed in isolation by 2 or 3 people, but it
Yes.
simply takes longer. There is no two ways about it.
No, you've got to have to refine it, and there's going to be a lot of back and forth. And yeah, particularly when it comes to language, as you say, sometimes some terms don't translate very well. And that can be a bit of a challenge too when trying to, in some of the work you're doing, define terminology or, choose what terms you will use to represent different things. And we know that they can differ, from company to company, or even within a company, different, teams can use different slang words or different, terminology and acronyms. I mean, that's a whole other story. But yeah, that's all part of the challenge, isn't it? So as you said, this really takes then a lot of time, and it can be a slow process because of all those factors that you've mentioned. And these are volunteer commitments in most cases. So how do you manage that around your paid work in terms of managing your time and your other commitments in your personal and family life?
I think, first of all, it really helps if you have an understanding family and an understanding employer.
Yes.
So I think when everyone is in the same time zone, I find most of my volunteer commitments and contributions happen in the evenings.
Right.
So it helps when your children are a bit older, right? You've got an understanding spouse. When you start to work with the international groups, there's an awful lot more early morning, 4 and 5 in the morning, or later in the evening calls, and sometimes you've got midday meetings to try to balance all those time zones. I think on a personal note, it's important to consider how much time you can actually devote to these volunteer commitments, because we're really asking people to show up and do part of their day job unpaid.
Yes.
So I always look at it, it's better to do something really well than be way too scattered and not complete any single task. So for myself, I treat my volunteer commitments like any other part of my job, and I schedule them in accordingly. Some days that means a mid-afternoon international call, but that simply extends my paid work day. So it's really important to make sure you fulfill all your paid work commitments when you're taking on these roles. So I think it's kind of that juggling act, and I get a lot of feel very energized when I've been participating, and I feel like I'm contributing and I can bring things back to the organization, but you need to recognize that it is a commitment.
Yes. And as you said, you've got an understanding employer, but I'm sure that they also value the what you can bring back, obviously, from those collaborations and what you learn through that process, that then, of course, also has value to them. It's not just something that you're doing in isolation. If it were, a hobby or a sport or something else that wasn't really related to your work, then that might be different. But I guess if they can see that.
Me have that up-to-date thinking, the viewpoint, how do these concepts from asset management apply in all these different industry sectors? And it's really important. It's not a one and done, I learned this 20 years ago in school. It's an ongoing, continuous thinking.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so part of that, in terms of, as you've said, we need to be a few years ahead of the curve. We've got to be innovating and looking to the future as to what's coming next, monitoring the trends and so on, and looking at how we then come up with those ideas that will shape the future. I think that human creativity and the way that we apply our creativity to these situations is a really important part of that. So I'd love to know, how do you nurture your creativity in your daily life?
I've got to say, I really like to hike, and I live in a really beautiful area of Canada near the mountains and a lot of rivers. And so I walk every day, no matter what the weather is like, by the river, and I hike on the mountains on most summer weekends. And it really gives me that chance to get out in nature. It gives me that opportunity to relax with my family and friends. And I often find when I'm alone, it gives me the chance to think. even in terms of preparation for, I knew we were going to have a conversation here.
Yes.
I can think about, okay, what are Monique and I likely to talk about? And then I can go for a walk and I can think about,
Yeah.
what do I want to say? What's important about international collaborations? And how does this impact not only my own career, but also the people around me?
Mm.
And so I often use this time to think creatively, or if I'm trying to solve a problem, come up with a new idea, work something out. I
Yeah.
find walking down by the river
Yeah.
very inspiring and creative for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, being in nature and even just walking, wherever you might walk, but just getting up from your desk, getting out of the house or out of the office and just having that bit of time to let your mind flow freely. Yeah, it's a great way, as you say, to perhaps ponder a few issues or, solve a problem or think of something that might be coming up. And for the people listening, a few weeks ago, Sue sent me a few beautiful photos of the mountains in her area where she'd been walking, and that was great for me to see. It looked lovely, and of course it's summer over there in Canada, or has been summer, and here it's of course winter in Australia. But I was able to send back a photo of the beach near me with some beautiful sunshine and the temperature at about the same level, I think.
Yes.
So yeah, so yeah, I can see how you'd be inspired by doing that, hiking in the mountains or around the rivers where you live, which is a beautiful area. So that's wonderful. So looking back, over the time so far, Sue, 25 years or more of your career, what has brought you the greatest satisfaction from that?
I think one of the biggest things was the variety. So part of this is, I started my career as a process engineer, a chemical engineer in Northern Alberta plant operations. And then I went back to school for my MBA and I did a stint in capital project management. And then I shifted much more into this reliability and now asset management strategy. And so over the years, I've progressively taken on additional employee leadership roles, and I've had much more influence over the asset management business decisions. And I've been in more of a consulting role for the last 6 years. And I've really developed this specialty of working with teams in transition. So they're dealing with significant leadership changes, they're dealing with focused efforts to pull the company forward in terms of its asset management or reliability and maintenance practices. Sometimes it's to maintain or even to achieve company viability in really tough economic times, or to advance to the next stage of maturity. And this work that really involves connecting the dots, the integration, the alignment from the senior leadership into something that the frontline staff can actually contribute to in a meaningful way, really brings me a lot of satisfaction. I read something once, and I can't remember where I saw it, but it talks about the different stages of your career. And it says early in your career, you focus on learning. In the middle of your career, you focus on the doing or performing of your work. And then towards the end of your career, you start giving back. And now I'm certainly not ready for retirement, but I feel like I'm giving back through my teaching of the asset management professional, the AMP education program, the maintenance management professional program, and my work with various clients. It's really about enabling others to advance their own careers as they're developing capability and competency within these topic areas. So I think I get a lot of satisfaction from variety. I get bored really easily. So the ability, if I'm doing the same thing in a year that I was doing, last year, I'm bored. So part of it is the satisfaction that comes with variety, progressive growth, and now giving back to others' careers.
Yeah, fantastic. And obviously it's good to have that flexibility, isn't it, in the way you choose to work. That gives you the opportunity to do different things, work on different projects, engage with different groups, as you've talked about. And I guess that all contributes to helping us not be bored by always having by always having a new challenge and something else to work towards. So that's fantastic. Now, this is the True Worth podcast, and we talk about true worth as as being when we feel respected, valued and seen for who we really are. And so, you know, in your context and from your experience, how do you in your own life embrace your own true worth?
I think part of it is about surrounding yourself with people who are like-minded and who bring their own strength and their own true worth together. So this is about a way to contribute back to the wider asset management community, but while also ensuring that we make time for our family and friends. They are number one, and they will be there long after any individual job, project, or client.
Yes.
And so I think it's really important to have these activities that we can do, whether it's by ourselves, with our family, with our friends. And then we want to surround ourselves by people who give us the confidence to take on the challenges that come at us. It's not about just yes, 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 but it's around giving yourself people around you who inspire you, who ensure that you can give back the best of yourself to the wider community.
Yeah, that support, it's really important, isn't it? In order for you to then do your best work, or for any of us to make that contribution, by having those who'll support us. And you know, when it is challenging, there's people we can turn to, and we know that we'll have that backup. So that's fantastic. Now, I mentioned at the start, Sue, your book, Root Cause Analysis Made Simple, driving bottom line improvements by preventing one failure at a time. Would you like to share with us any highlights, or who is this book for, and who should be looking to read it?
So this is one of those situations where I had been debating writing a book, and my co-author actually said, let's write this. Are you interested? And so that was the little nudge to actually get it going. I could pretend it was otherwise, but that was part of it, right? At that stage, I had a lot of things going on, and there was the little nudge. So when you see those opportunities, take advantage of them.
Yeah.
I think the book was written in response to the fact that I was working inside of a company. We had a lot of people who were trying to improve what was happening around them. And this book is really the who, what, where, when, why, and a little lighter on the how for the frontline staff. There are thousands and thousands of pages of written of how to do the mechanics of this.
Yes.
Very little on the business side. Why would we do root cause analysis? How does it contribute to our overall value and things like that? So while it's not, there's quite a number of areas that I focus on with asset management, the business decision making, the strategy. Sometimes we need things at the front line that somebody can pick up, can read, and can implement almost right away. It gives them a sense of positive contribution back. And all of these small things and small skill sets that you learn give people confidence to contribute to the wider improvement opportunities.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, we'll include a link there in the show notes, but for those who are listening who'd like to get a copy of your book, where will they find it?
Easiest place is to look on Amazon in your respective country. The publisher is MRO Zone Publisher, but it is on Amazon in most of it's only in English speaking countries.
Yeah. Fantastic. That's great. So I recommend that to anybody who's interested in that area to seek it out. Now, thanks so much, Sue. I really appreciate having this chat with you this morning. Wonderful to hear your insights and to learn from your experience. So thank you. And thanks to everyone who's listening today. If this conversation has sparked your interest, then I'd love you to join us in the True Worth community, where we can share ideas and insights and inspiration. And you can find that at trueworth.mn.co. And I'd love you to join us. Thanks all very much.